everyone. Welcome back to Midweek at the Compass. My name's Jake. I'm one of the pastors here, and we are continuing to have some faith-based conversations around what we are learning with our weekend services. You know, we are just at week 2 of our new sermon series called Egypt, A Line in the Sand, where we are looking at the biblical narrative of all of these different events that happened in Egypt and what we can ultimately learn through them. This last week, we've been learning about the importance of our legacies. Every single one of us will leave a legacy. Our hope and our prayer is that it's going to be one that is God-honoring, that He would use to do things that we would have never thought possible on our own. But that only comes when we trust and rely on Him to do just that. That's why I'm excited to be joined here today by Pastor Derrick Jackson, who's been willing to share a little bit of his story and the legacy that he's working to leave here as well. Derrick, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you again, Pastor Jake, for having me.
So I would love to just start by asking you, who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Derrick Jackson, and I've been a pastor for many years here in the Wheaton area. I'm a pastor at Wheaton Christian Center Church, and I grew up right in the area. I probably grew up just less than half a mile from here, maybe a quarter mile from here, and so this is my old stomping grounds. And so I'm happy to be here to help and assist in the sermon any way I can.
Love it. So let's just talk a little bit of your backstory.
Okay.
Then. So this is your old stomping ground.
Yes.
What could people have known you for growing up?
Well, I would probably say athletics, because I grew up in a neighborhood where we just loved sports. That's all we did all day long. As a kid, I remember I was always outside. You know, I don't know how I could have existed today because everybody's on their phones. I was never in my house. I was always outside, just running and playing sports, basketball, baseball, football, whatever the kids in the neighborhood were doing. I was out there. So I probably, if you ask somebody that grew up with me, they'd probably say that I was a basketball player or a baseball player.
Okay. So that turned into something unique for you, though, right?
Yeah.
I like to say that I used to be an athlete as well, but maybe not quite on the same level as you were. So I think you're maybe underselling it a little bit. So if you would have been known for athletics, what did that ultimately lead towards?
Well, I would say that it led toward a lot of hard work, and it was at that time. The hard work that I call it hard work would be perfecting my skill in both of those sports. But it was fun for me, so it wasn't really hard work. It was I loved doing it, so I just did it all day long because it was, a lot of fun. So I loved being active. I loved playing. I loved running. I loved jumping. And God had given me a skill physically in that area, and so it was easy for me to do it. It was easy. We had a neighborhood full of kids that did the same thing. And so that was why it was just, I don't look back at it as work, but it was work.
Yeah. So your hard work ultimately paid off because you ended up being able to play basketball in college. Why don't you tell a little bit of that story for us?
Yeah, that was interesting. It's a fascinating story. I ended up playing actually baseball and basketball in college. I actually was all-state in 2 sports my senior year in high school. And so, and I was actually drafted to the Texas Rangers out of high school, and then ended up going to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. on a scholarship, where I played for legendary coach John Thompson. He's now deceased, but he was a very, during his days, he was very popular and famous. He actually played behind Bill Russell for the Celtics when he was playing basketball, and he played on the college and professional level as well, but he was my coach in college, so he won a national championship. I think it was in 1984, I think, or 5. But I think he was the first black coach ever to win a national championship in basketball. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you end up deciding between whether to go play for the Texas Rangers or to go to college to play basketball at Georgetown?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. It's actually some of the providence that God worked in my life. As a kid, I was 17. I graduated high school at 17 years old, and so I was a kid, and I was very naive, even though I had a wonderful child life. My parents got saved when I was 1, and they led me to Christ when I was 6. And so, but at that time, I had an option to either play for the Texas Rangers and go into their, their farm system, or to play at Georgetown. And I don't remember the circumstances behind me signing, but I did actually sign with the Texas Rangers to play baseball. And of course, when you sign on the dotted line, you're signed. You're committed. It's not, a commitment. They have
it's a contract.
It's a contract. You don't just walk away from that and say, I don't want to do that anymore. No, you signed. It's like signing to go into the service.
Right.
You're in there.
Yeah.
And so, but I was John Thompson and came, and he and his assistant Mary Finland came and recruited me, and they were actually recruiting me. That's why I don't know how that all worked out. But I'm not sure of the timing of it. But they were recruiting me for about probably 6 to 8 months, and I was convinced I wanted to play basketball, but I had signed this contract to play for the Texas Rangers. And so it ended up, what happened was, to make a long story very, very short, was that there was a man in my life whose name was Mike Foster, and he was actually a father figure to me. And he had graduated from Georgetown. He was the one who told John Thompson, because Georgetown University is in Washington, D.C.
Right.
So, and John Thompson did not recruit in this area because the D.C. area is like Chicago. It's like, filled with incredible basketball talent. So he never had to even go out of D.C. When I played there, I was probably one of 3 people that was not even from the D.C. area.
Oh, interesting.
There was a huge talent pool there. And so I came out here only because, this is one of the other providential things that happened with my life, but only because Mike Foster kept calling John Thompson over and over and over and over and over again. And he just said, I got to get this guy off my back. So I'm going to go and see this guy play. So I can remember walking through the hallways. I can remember John Thompson was 6'10" and 300 pounds. So he was a gargantuous guy.
Always had a towel, right?
Yeah, always on a towel shoulder, right? That was his forte. But he and Mary Finland was a really short white lady. He was a real tall black guy. And I remember seeing them walking through the halls of our school at Wheaton Central High School, which is right a block away from here, not even a block from here. And he was walking down the hallways, and I was looking at him and saying, who in the world is that? All the kids were looking at him because we didn't know who he was. I didn't know who he was. Yeah. Because what we was coming for is to check out my grades and so forth. So anyway, he recruited me, and I signed this contract to play for the Texas Rangers, and I was bound by them. And some kind of a way, Mike Foster, I found out later on. Actually, I just talked to his kids the other day, and his name is Matt Foster, which is his son. I found out that Mike Foster worked secretly for the CIA.
So the brain can run wild for how you got out of that contract.
My conjecture is that he twisted some arms and did something in there to get me out of the Texas Ranger contract so I could play at Georgetown. So, the providence of God is in that, because there's a whole long story behind me going there. And John Thompson Mike Foster was another father figure for me. John Thompson was another father figure for me, and that was all orchestrated by God all along the way there to get me there, because I had to go through a maturing process underneath him that allowed me to be able to ultimately choose to serve God. So it's interesting, because John Thompson was not even a Christian. Yeah. So God used people in my life that were not even saved to bring me to a point where I would make a total commitment and sell out. So it's a fascinating story. It gives me chill bumps to think about it.
Yeah. So while you were at Georgetown, things went pretty well.
Yes, they did.
To the point where, I don't want to spoil the story, but what happened to you as you were graduating from Georgetown?
Well, another providential story, another miracle. It's actually absolutely fantastic story where I went through college and ended up becoming All-American. I quit baseball as a sophomore because I wanted to focus more on basketball. And I ended up being All-American. And so toward the end of my senior year, the Lord was talking to me, but I was a Jonah. I wasn't listening. I wanted to play pro. I said my whole goal and aspirations, desires, from a child was to be professionally in baseball and basketball. And so I knew that I would be drafted basketball-wise. But interestingly, if you know anything about basketball, especially college basketball, at the end of that year, at the end of every year, that's called March Madness. Everybody knows what that is. That's like, it's like so common. So we came to my senior year. We're in March Madness. So I'm in my dorm room, and my roommate that I had for maybe probably 3 years was there with me. And at 2:00 in the morning, I jumped out of the bed and ran to the bathroom and threw up. And it was all blood. And what happened was, I had an ulcer that broke open. And I'm not saying God did this. I'm saying God used it.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, God was speaking to me. He didn't want me to go pro, but I wasn't listening to him. And so what happened was, I went into the hospital. I mean, this is the very night before the game. The person I was playing against was Norm Nixon. That name, Norm Nixon, ended up playing for the Lakers for many, many years.
Yeah.
So I was looking forward to matching my skill level against his. And so that night, I became, I don't know if you know anything about losing blood, but when you lose blood, you become very, very weak.
Right.
And so here I'm a basketball player, and yet you can't be weak and play basketball. So I couldn't even walk. I could not walk. I woke up that morning. I went back to sleep that night after I threw up in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning. And I got up the next morning, but I lost so much blood that I could not walk literally more than 10 feet without having to sit down. But I tried to fake it.
Yeah.
I didn't want anybody to find out. My roommate was saying, "What are you doing? You can't even walk. How are you going to play in the game? You can't even walk." And so I got downstairs, and I started leaning over my seat, and Coach Thompson was watching me, and he saw that something was wrong, and they had to call the ambulance. I was taken to the hospital that very night, the very same day the game happened. That was not by accident, against the providence of God. I went to the hospital for 2 weeks, had an operation, and for 2 more weeks I took to recover. And at that time, there were ulcers were operated on. They had to go inside of me and do whatever they did to get the blood stopped and so on.
Yeah.
But I missed the entire March Madness, and during that time, for 1 month, this is the key to all this. The answer to the question is that me and God were arguing back and forth for an entire month.
Yeah.
God was saying, I want you to not, I haven't called you there. I don't want you to go pro. And this is happening all silently with myself between. I said, no, I want to go pro. I don't want to play for, there was a team called Athletes in Action, which is the athletic arm of Campus Crusade for Christ. And they wanted me to come there to play for them. And I said, no, I don't want to go there. I want to play pro. And the Lord says, no. And we argued back and forth, and it took about, probably 28, 29 days for me to say, all right.
Yeah.
I'll do it. And so I went there. I actually ended up not even trying out professionally. I got drafted and ended up not even trying out. I went straight to Athletes in Action, and that's where God began to mature me and grow me. And that's where I actually received the call of God in my life when I was there. But I mean, before that, it was a step-by-step process for me to say yes to God. And that yes meant giving up basketball, not giving up basketball, but giving up this idea that I could play pro. Because I played basketball for 3 years at Athletes in Action, which is we used basketball as a means to share the gospel. We traveled all over the world, Philippines. We were there, and we were all over. And I was probably in 40, 45 states of America. We just traveled. That's all we did was travel. And at halftime, we would share the gospel. So that was a part. To me, it didn't feel like it was ministry because I was playing ball. Sure. That's what I was doing. But in God's mind, he was saying, I'm preparing you for the calling of God, which was, had not come to me yet. But I mean, that was kind of a short version of that story.
So you worked your whole life for this dream.
Yeah.
And then you wrestle with God in the best Jacob story as you can, right? You didn't walk away with a limp, but you walked away with a hospital visit.
Right.
And ultimately, it was still one where you were drafted into the NBA, and yet you chose to go another route.
Yeah.
So what did God do in your life during those 3 years where you were a part of Athletes in Action?
Well, it's very fascinating because I have to go back. I have to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Going back to college and give you this really short story that ties into the calling of God. But anyway, I graduated from college, and that was a miracle, really. I only studied in order to play ball.
Yeah, sure.
So I was a straight C student. Why? Because that's exactly what you needed to have to play. They didn't ask me for 2.3 or 2.4, 2.5. They said, if you get a 2.0, you can play. So that's what I got. So I ended up, I can remember graduating, and I was sitting in the room, and this is in between the time of graduation and me actually, because I went straight from college to California, which is where Athletes in Action was located at.
Okay.
And so I was sitting in the room with my friend at that time. We were best friends for 4 years. Actually, we were best friends for longer than that. We had been best friends from 5th grade. And he had come to D.C. and he was working there. Anyway, that's another story. But we were sitting in the room together watching television. And I'm sitting there watching television like I'd done I'm 21 years old. I grew up watching television, playing ball. So it was nothing like, it wasn't a Christian program I was watching. I'm just watching a normal, probably a sitcom or something like that.
Yeah.
In the middle of that, a desire to read comes on me. And you're saying, but what in the world does that mean? I don't know. I didn't ask for it. I went through college and I hated reading. How did you get through? Because I had to read only to play ball.
Right.
So I'm sitting there watching this television show, and all of a sudden a desire to read comes on me. I'm saying, what is this? I don't even know what that is. I'd never heard anybody talk about it before. I didn't know it even existed. So I just ignored it. I said, doesn't mean anything to me. So I ended up going to play, and how that ties into the Athletes in Action thing. So God was preparing me for the ministry, because when I got there, the desire to read, it didn't manifest immediately right away. Maybe it took 6 months to a year. But what happened was that desire to read came because I knew I had to study the Bible.
Yeah.
And so that came on me really hard and heavy. I started reading the scripture for hours. Because when you're playing, when you're playing basketball, we maybe had a 2 or 3 hour practice. And then that means you have the rest of the day to do whatever you want to do.
Yep.
And so I spent hours and hours and hours, sometimes 16, 18 hours a day reading the Bible and other books during that time. And I didn't even know what it was for.
Wow.
Because I didn't even it wasn't like I was answering God's call, because I was there for 3 years.
Yeah.
And so I started this probably in the year into it. So maybe in the second and third years where I started, this desire to read just exploded. And at that time, I had not said yes to God yet about going to preach. I was saying, no, I'm not doing that. I was on another Jonah moment. I was shy, introverted, was afraid to speak publicly. I remember the first time I ever spoke in high school. Invited because I was a Christian, and I was a sophomore in high school. And I was playing varsity. They said, we want you to come. And Don Kissinger was, I don't know if you remember those names, Glenn Beckert, back in the Cubs days.
Yep.
It was one of those banquets, and I stood up in front of the whole audience. There was like 5,000 people there. I know the Lord was just laughing in heaven. I stood up and started speaking. I was chewing gum. I was giving my testimony about chewing gum. And the Lord smacking into the mic. And I didn't even notice it until I was done. So you're chewing gum. I spit it out. How can you chew gum and speak publicly? It's impossible. You can't do that. So anyway, back to this whole situation where I was reading. So I started meditating in the Bible, and I was reading books, good books, but I was spending most of my time just reading the Bible, even though I grew up a Christian. I was in church Sunday and Wednesday in prayer sessions. My parents had me there, but I had not grown.
Right. I
wasn't maturing because I was obeying my parents, but I was not maturing in the Word at that time because I was not diligent to do what I was here, what God was preparing for me there. So anyway, that's where I was there for about 2 years, a year and a half or so. And that's what the call of God came to me, which is another miracle. But that whole story, the whole story of me getting to Athletes in Action, and what happened was that they taught us, we would have Bible trainings and Bible studies, not only with the leadership teaching us, but also because many of the players were Christians, and so we would have that amongst ourselves. We're living a pretty Christian life there. Anyway, where the Word of God was, at the forefront of our behavior and our actions. And so that led up to the point where they taught us how to give our testimonies, because we had to give our testimonies at halftime. We had to make it within 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
And so we had to write it out and then memorize it, because the system said the model that we used during half times was there was an introduction, then a testimony, then a closing, and that was like 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 3 minutes in there. And so we had to do it all within 6 or 7 minutes. And so at the very beginning, because I was so shy, I hated to speak publicly at all. I didn't even. They had to force me to do this. And so they said, you got to do it. So it took them probably about a year to get me to get up there. Okay. And that was like 1 minute. That was an introduction up to 1 minute. Now I can't even say hello in 1 minute now.
I don't need all 7 of these, just one. Give me 1 minute. We're good. Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, that's how that began. And so the discipline of that lent to the discipline of, studying the Word and just getting into the biblical text and understanding God's purpose and plan. And
then that all ultimately led to pastoral ministry for you.
And ended up leading to the calling of God, which is another miracle. I don't know if you want to tell that story. You want to hear that story or not?
How about, can we get a 2-minute version of it?
Okay, 2 minutes. Well,
that's not a hard and fast 2 minutes.
The 2 minutes happened where I was in a prayer meeting, and we were praying, and the Lord was calling me to come back to Illinois, because he was telling me, I want you to go back and serve Pastor Carlton Arthur's. And I knew that God had called me to preach, but I was back in my Jonah spirit again, Jonah moments, and I was saying, no, I'm not doing that. I was arguing back and forth with God, and so I was in this big prayer meeting, and we were in a big circle, and this guy was leading us into prayer, and he was on the other side of the circle, and it was in a huge room. I mean, I'm talking about a huge room. It was about 200 of us in there praying before the service started, and so we were all praying, and he's on the other side of the room, and I'm saying everything is fine with me. I'm just holding the people's hand. I'm saying this is a normal prayer meeting, so nice, wonderful. And he's walking around to my left, going around the circle, right, walking in front of people, and he gets about 20 feet away from me, and the Spirit of God comes upon me, and I'm nervous. I'm saying he's gonna say something to me. I said, Lord, if you allow this man not to embarrass me, I'll do what you tell me to do. So I close my eyes, and I'm saying to myself, I'm closing my eyes because I don't want him to see me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm closing my eyes. I'm like this one going,
walk past, please walk past.
Yeah, keep going by me. So he stops right in front of me, Pastor Jake, and I can sense him there. And my eyes are closed like this. And I open my eyes, he looks me right in the eyes, and he says, you need to obey God. 3 times, and goes away. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Yeah. God had told me, I want you to go back home. And it's because I'd been there for 3 years, and I wanted to continue to play that way. It was in my blood still. And took another instance like that, but that was the beginning of the call of the, actually it wasn't the beginning of it, but it was one of the things that God used to say, you're disobeying God. I've told you to do something, you haven't done it. And so I ended up going back home based upon that and a couple other things, but that's kind of like the 2-minute version.
I love it. So you had the opportunity to play professional sports in more than one area. Yeah. Ultimately followed where you felt like God was leading you to go.
Yes, sir.
Complete different legacy.
Yeah.
So just to tie it back to that thought and concept of what do you feel like God has done in your life? What's the legacy you're hoping to leave by not having played basketball, but instead now serving as a pastor?
Well, I just, it gives me chill bumps to think about what God had to do to get me to even answer him and to obey him. But it just tells about the very mercies and kindnesses of God. But I mean, I have an intense fire that I can't explain, that's inside of my heart, and it burns to win the lost of Christ, and to see the gospel, the Great Commission all over the world, beginning right here, and right here in my area, and the church that I serve has 2 campuses, one in Carroll Stream and one in Aurora, and then of course I believe that I'm here because my parents are from Chicago, that I also have a calling to the city of Chicago, and the horrible things that happen there with the gang banging and murders and so on. I want to be involved in that as well. But I don't know how to explain it other than the fact that there's a fire that's shut up in my bones that'll be there until the day I die. So I don't know how to explain that and put that in words.
Yeah.
But it's to see the lost saved, sick healed, or whatever God would have for me to do. I want to be able to see that happen. So
I would love to know, just because you're here and I get the chance to ask it, just, is there like one ministry highlight, one story that you can go back to where you're like, man, I saw God at work here, outside of your story, because God was very clearly and obviously at work in your life. But is there one other experience maybe that, the first
absolutely.
one even that comes to mind?
Absolutely.
Of where have you seen God at work since that time?
Absolutely. I've always been a very shy person, so for God to call me to speak publicly that was a joke. You got to be kidding me. That wasn't the last thing on the list. It wasn't even on the list to be the last thing what I'm doing right now, preaching the gospel. You've got to be kidding me. That's why it took a miracle for me to say yes to this. Miracles, not miracle, miracles.
Yeah.
For me to get here where I'm at. Anyway, one of the instances that you referred to, and this is, I know I have to get through this quickly because it's kind of a story, but I wanted to be able to, because I was shy and introverted, I wanted to be able to tell people about Jesus, and I knew that I could not just, I had gone door to door, I had gone and done, things like passing out tracts. And those are all good things, I like that, but I wanted to have something that I could do that was it was easy for me to do. And so I remember, I have a term that we call serving kindness. I kind of created that term. It is a combination of the words. But anyway, how I define that is that the Lord asked me to go to, there was a church in Ohio that was teaching on what they call things like cupcake evangelism. You bake cakes and give people things like that. And,
okay.
And through that, you'll be able to share the gospel from somebody, then take them out to dinner and things like that. So anyway, I went there to say, okay, this is really wonderful. I like that. Maybe I can do that kind of thing. So I went there to learn, and this story actually secured for me the track that I was on that was right. But I went there and went into the first session, and they were telling us how what you can do instead of when you go to a restaurant, instead of just giving a tip. And which is the customary for everybody when you're buying food, just make sure you tell them God loves you or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a very easy thing for me. I said that's easy. I can do that. So I go there. We start. My wife and I are together, and we're going to this restaurant. And we don't know where to go. We're in Ohio. We've never been there before. And we just decide to stop at this restaurant. It's for lunch, and we go inside, and it's probably a small kind of a cracker box restaurant. And we sit down, and this little young girl, she's 19 years old, and she comes up to our table and serves us. And I said, I'm going to do what they tell me to do. At the end, I called over the manager, and it's ironic because there's also a racial component to this. Because myself and my wife are black, and she's white, and she's a young girl, 19 years old. We call over the manager, and we say, and the girls, she's trembling because she thinks we're going to say something bad about her.
Yeah. And
we're going to say, we told the manager, we said, we are so happy that the server here, she was great. We loved her. She did a great job. And we want to let you know, we want to say thank you. And we want to give her 100% tip.
Yeah.
And so, now watch this, Pastor Jake. This is where, in the middle of this, God speaks to me. This is a life-changing experience for me. I'm sitting there, and the manager is black. The little girl's white. And the manager turns to us and says, you don't know what you just did. We were getting ready to fire her because she wasn't doing a good job. And the little girl had just birthed a little baby. The baby was less than a month or two old. In the middle of that, the Spirit of God talks to me and says, you thought I sent you to Ohio to go to a conference to learn about what you call serving kindness. I sent you there for one reason. That little girl. You paid for a flight. You pay for a car rental. You pay for a hotel. You pay for the commission. I sent you there. All that you paid, but I sent you there for that one girl. That experience right now, I have chill bumps up and down my spine because that experience changed my life. Because I knew that something that God orchestrated all those things together. Why did I stop at that restaurant?
Yeah.
Why was that girl there? Why was that manager there? Why all these things worked together was at the perfect time to come together so I could tell this little girl, just God loves you. And give her encouragement that, God is thinking about you because he sent me here all the way from Illinois just to tell you about Jesus. That was the whole thing. I said, and right now I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how good God is and what God will do for one soul. This is one girl.
Right.
One 19-year-old girl just had a baby out of wedlock. She wasn't even saved.
Yeah. God orchestrates so many things behind the scenes, right?
The providence of God. Behind the scenes, all those things were orchestrated to make that thing come to pass. I didn't go there. I went there to learn, and I learned from that one experience that sharing the gospel, taking the gospel to the world, can be done in many different kinds of ways. You can be creative with that.
Right.
And that creativity says, I said, man, you can do all kinds of things to tell people that God loves them, that Jesus died for them.
And that changes the trajectory of people's lives, including your own, right?
Absolutely.
As you were sitting there sharing that story, it reminded me a little bit of myself, and I don't like turning these things back to me. I'd rather it be all about the people that are joining in, but I didn't always do full-time ministry, and one of the parts of my story that I don't quite share as frequently as some of the others was somebody did the exact same thing that you did for this server. I was a consultant before. I was in the midst of wrestling through what ministry might look like. Was God actually calling me into ministry? Just truly wrestling with all of it. And I ended up in Dallas. I was able to finish up work early. And I am not the type of guy that tries to find an earlier flight. Like, I would rather just have a schedule and stay to it. It helps me stay calm.
Discipline, right?
Yeah, that's right. We'll call it whatever it is. But for the very first time in 5 years, I was like, I'm going to try and catch an earlier flight home. So I was able to get the last seat on a flight. I get in there, I would open up my Bible, I was doing my devotional as I was reading. And all of a sudden, halfway through the flight, this lady looks over at me. She's like, can I talk to you for a minute? It's like, yeah, sure. What's going on? She's like, so I just want you to know that every time I fly, I pray for the seat next to me. And I was praying for the seat next to me for whoever the person was going to be. And I was so frustrated because there was never anybody in it. Nothing was booked. It was just an open seat the whole time. And I'm like, God, you have me on this flight for a reason because you've told me I need to ask the person sitting next to me a question. And it was never there. And then all of a sudden you show up. So I need to ask you a question. I said, okay, that's a long preamble, but what do you got for me? It's like, are you a pastor?
At this time you were not.
No. I was like, no, I'm not. It's a funny story. My wife and I are, in process and considering whether that's a move we make in the future. But those are conversations that we just started, not really anywhere solidified with it. She looks at me, it's like, you're supposed to be. I'm sorry, what? Trajectory of my life. Obviously, there was more mixed into it than that.
Absolutely.
But God used somebody that I had never met that was going to be willing to be prayerful, that was put on a flight for a reason she didn't understand, praying for a seat that was open for a reason she didn't understand, felt like she was supposed to ask a question and nobody was there. And then lo and behold, for the first time in my life, I catch an earlier flight, I grab the last empty seat, and it's this God-orchestrated, ordained
Absolutely.
Conversation.
The providence of God.
That's right. It changed. It's a legacy, right? Like, it's one of those, my life is different. God willing, other people's lives that I'm coming across on a day in, day out basis are going to have changed because they come to know Jesus. And if I play even the smallest part in that, then it's worth it.
Right.
It's 100% worth it.
Absolutely. I love it.
Awesome. Derrick, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, man, it's my privilege.
Really enjoyed it. Just honestly. One last thing before we go, just where can people find you if they're curious about where you're pastoring at or how they might be able to get a hold of you?
Well, again, my name is Derrick Jackson, and I actually have a website online, derrickjackson.com. I also, we have, you can get hold of me at the church there, Wheaton Christian Center. We have a website there called wheatonchristiancenter.org. And so I'm there as well. So, I'm out there. And so in contact, you can get a hold of me. So.
There you go. People can get a hold of me,
Absolutely.
so I can get a hold of you.
Absolutely.
Done. Thank you again. And everybody else joining in, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us at Midweek at the Compass. We'll be back next time as we're going to continue working through our Egypt sermon series. And I'm excited to have you join in. So again, make sure you come back and join us next time here at Midweek at the Compass.